This has been a difficult year. In our national culture, we've had quite a bit of political tension that has led to a nail biter of a presidential election. We've had a record number of hurricanes that have struck the coast. We've had wildfires that have been burning out west. We've had a worldwide pandemic, racial tensions that included riots and looting. That's all within our national culture. And within our church culture over the last year, we've seen our primary means of functioning, our public worship services, sequestered by fears of contamination. Our members are scattered. Those who were marginal in their commitment have now become totally disengaged. There's a yearning, I notice it, a yearning to reconnect, yet there appears to be no tangible end in sight. Churches that previously had been united in Christ alone are now divided into camps of the pandemic response, or political convictions, or even our racial backgrounds. Growth groups that had provided support and inspiration found themselves struggling with how to log in to a Zoom meeting and how to share personal concerns via a computer screen. Worship leaders who had gotten quite good at the weekly production of worship experiences were now forced to go online and learn new skills for connecting with both an on-campus and an online audience, both isolated in their own ways. Caring fatigue has set in. The lack of secure attachment to one another has increased our avoidance of one another and our anxiety about whether others truly care for us. Just because we're apart, we're truly living in a strange land. In the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, the people of God found themselves in exile, and they were living in a strange land. There were 12 tribes in Israel. They had a civil war. 10 of those tribes became known as the Northern Kingdom and kept the name Israel. And 2 of those tribes formed the Southern Kingdom, and they took the name of Judah. In 722 BC, Assyria conquered the 10 northern tribes and carried them off into Assyrian captivity. And frankly, the 10 tribes, we refer to them as lost tribes because they were never to be seen again. They were scattered all over the world. For about another 200 years, the southern kingdom held out until Babylon, under King Nebuchadnezzar, took siege of the southern kingdom, and by 586 had destroyed the temple there and carried many of the people off into captivity in Babylon. Among those who were in captivity were Daniel and his 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. In an effort to assimilate the captives into the Babylonian culture, these 4 leaders' Hebrew names were changed into pagan names: Belshazzar for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for the 3 friends. All of these names were reflective of pagan gods that were part of the Babylonian culture. All were honoring pagan gods. So you see that these people were living in a strange land where their pattern of following God alone was being interrupted by a culture that was trying to deconstruct them. Reading from Daniel chapter 1 and verse 3. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who'd been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter into royal service. Do you notice in those passages how the people of God are under attack by the pagan culture, which was trying to assimilate God's people into their culture rather than them continuing to follow God, their culture of food and literature and learning. Daniel objects to the food, and when they bring him in, and he says to the chief of staff, we don't want to eat the rich foods that are provided here by Babylon. Would you allow us to eat vegetables and just drink water? And the chief of staff said, I can't, because if you end up scrawny and unhealthy, then the king will behead me. And Daniel said, well, just test us for 10 days. You continue to feed the rest, the food of the king, but give us vegetables and water. And they did. And as you know the rest of the story, at the end of 10 days, it says that Daniel and his friends were healthier and better nourished. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who'd been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided by the others. So you see that they did what they could to continue to serve God faithfully in a strange land. Verse 17 of chapter 1 of Daniel. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. Now, this is an important verse because Nebuchadnezzar brought Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the royal palace because of what he saw as the wisdom they had. And the writer of Hebrews is making it clear here that whatever wisdom and knowledge that they had, it was given to them by God and God alone. And they not only had natural gifts, they had the supernatural gifts of interpreting visions and dreams. Verse 18, when the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than the magicians and enchanters of his own kingdom. What a great example of people who stood firm in their desire to follow Yahweh and him alone, even in a culture that was foreign to them. Nebuchadnezzar wanted his culture to benefit from the wisdom of God's people, and yet he wanted God's people to assimilate themselves into the culture that he had. What we see is that the people of God brought heaven's solutions to the challenges of a pagan world. We certainly have trouble in our world, and they certainly had trouble in this biblical world. And yet the grace that we see in the Bible is that they took what solutions God gave to his people and used them to help the pagan people that were living all around them. What natural or supernatural gifts has God given to you and to me that he intends for us to use in our service of him, even when we are living in a strange land? The COVID-19 pandemic has reshaped the church around the world. We've been forced to develop new ways of ministry. We've been forced to reevaluate our commitment to be followers of Jesus first and to also continue to make disciples. It's sort of shaken the world as we knew it. What we've become conditioned to as Christians. Suddenly we had to ask the base questions once again. What does it mean to follow Jesus? And how will I make disciples as I'm following him? The church itself had to shift from our own campus worship to 5 months of online worship only. Can you imagine if someone had told us that 2 years ago, that, hey, in just a short time, you're not even going to be able to meet on your campus for 5 months? We would have found it hard to believe. And yet, with the grace of God, we've been able to offer online worship to our people. And then from starting in August, we went to both online and on-campus worship. We learned to adapt in this strange new land. Our growth groups were forced to meet by Zoom, and we realized quickly some of us don't even know how to log into Zoom. And then we also realized how impersonal it is to be trying to interact with people that before we could sit around a circle close, we could embrace as they came in. And now we're forced to communicate with each other via a computer screen or an iPhone screen that's there. Our growth groups had to adjust. How do you continue to extend hospitality to newcomers? Well, how do you invite somebody to an online worship experience? How do you invite someone to be part of a Zoom group? One of the saddest parts for me has been how our little children have transitioned entire developmental stages in this time that we've been away from each other. What were little babies are now walking around for us. We did our best to offer online experiences so that the families could lead their children through these difficult days. For months, our members prepared every day insights into our church's 5x5 devotional readings, and different individuals and families would come on each 5 days a week and try to share their insights. And it was great to see one another. And yet it only made us long have this even deeper yearning to reconnect with each other. Loved ones passed away, and we had to celebrate their homegoing, standing 6 feet apart and unable to embrace one another, unable to embrace those who were grieving over their loss. Our resource center opened back up in May, providing food and clothing and hope to our patrons. A church in South Jackson, Higher Ground Praise and Worship Center, had been donating clothes and food to other shelters, which had all closed during the pandemic. And they did a Google search and found our resource center had remained open. And so they formed a partnership with us. And they shared so many of the same values we have, that you provide the very best to those people that you serve in Jesus' name. And so they have brought 25 or 30 boxes of brand new clothes, many of them still with the tags on them from the stores. They brought to us other items. They brought cash to help us buy food to distribute each week on Tuesdays. It's been a wonderful partnership that has developed with the Higher Ground Church that I don't think would have happened had we not been in this strange new land. We've continued our partnership with the Ann Smith Elementary School, providing those supplies for their backpacks that they send home with children on the weekends, children who have a deficiency of food through the weekend between Friday and Monday. And now they're able to take a backpack filled with food to get them through the weekend. We make small promises and we keep them. That's the philosophy we followed. It's been also interesting during this time to watch how the Resource Center has gone from a place of just distributing resources to developing relationships. The patrons are becoming our friends. We're able to nurture them in the faith and to bring them into the fellowship of some of our Bible studies and to pray with them about what's going on in their life. Friendships are developing. People are coming closer to Christ as a result of this work in a strange new land. We're in the process of developing a sustainable digital ministry, not just uploading the things we already do on campus to our website, but actually having a sustainable digital ministry that makes connections with people. And this will require the learning of new skills and how to make disciples via the internet, via Facebook, disciples who love God and love people, and that we are personally connected to and responding to. You know, during this pandemic, even our baptismal waters have been stirred with people who have made professions of faith and wanted to acknowledge Him publicly through baptism. We've seen new members join our church. We are living in a strange new land. We're in exile in many respects, waiting for that day when we'll be reunited in heaven. But meanwhile, we have not been left alone. God has given us natural and supernatural gifts to help us live in this strange new land. I wonder if you've recognized some gifts that God has given to you during this time. A natural gift that you have that He can use to continue to further His kingdom, to make disciples. And maybe some supernatural gift that you've been given that you can engage in during this time that can begin to move heaven and earth. Wherever we live, God's Spirit is always with us. even in a strange new land. Will you pray with me? Lord, in these dark and difficult times, grant us the grace to see your face with undiminished love. Replenish our reserves, for the road is still long. Give us the natural and supernatural gifts to live faithfully in a strange land. Surprise us in the coming days with glimpses of your goodness, hints of your holiness, and a song of hope in this very strange land. We offer this prayer in the name of the great I Am, Jesus Christ, our risen Lord. Amen.
Good and gracious King. And I will give to you my burden as you give to me your strength. Come and fill me with your spirit as I sing to you this praise. You deserve the greater glory. Overcome, I lift my voice to the King in need of nothing. Empty-handed I rejoice. Serve the greater glory. Overcome with joy I sing. By your love I am accepted. You're a good and gracious King. Grace that you would see me as your child and as your friend, safe, secure in you forever. I pour out my praise again. You deserve the greater glory. Come, I lift my voice to the King in need of nothing. You're a good and gracious King. You're a good and gracious King.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us for Church Online this week. We want to ask that if this sermon was encouraging or inspiring to you, that you would share it with a friend, because we know that whoever finds God finds life. We'll see you back here next week.